Well, Leslie, we missed last week, and I still feel bad about that. We were in the middle of a little mini series that we were creating because we talked about the theme of adoption last episode, which is now 2 weeks ago from this. And we've just been going through a very full season at Ellerslie. Do you want to talk about some of the fun things we're doing here at the campus and what's happening?
Well, we always gear up for what we call training season this time of year. So we have a kind of a quiet location here at Ellerslie from like November through April. And then this time of year, we start to really gear up for our first batch of students coming. And we have students arriving this Saturday. So that's our advanced program. And then basically we'll have groups coming through all the way through to mid-October.
Yeah.
And so we have our 2 5-week trainings, our week-long couple of alumni summits, our advanced training, the
Set
Set
Apart
Apart
Conference.
So there's just a lot going on. So there's always things to do on the campus to get ready and geared up and prepped. So that definitely keeps everybody busy.
So I know we're like setting up all the rooms for the students, in the dorms. We took our coffee camper, which is 1955, I think, in its year. And
Very retro.
It sort of looks 1955. Last year, it sort of functioned as 1955, and we've been sort of renovating that.
But we have, just to clarify, you and me do not personally do the renovations. If people think we're out there like
That's a good
drilling
point.
and, we,
I liked them thinking we
yeah,
were, though.
but sadly we can't,
We
can't
do
pull
a
that
lot
off.
of other things, though.
Yeah,
So
well, I think just managing all the projects and sort of
Yeah.
making sure everything moves forward. And then I've been doing a lot of filming for a new online course that I'm doing.
Well, because this isn't filmed again. So this is I think like our third or fourth, I don't know how many episodes since we moved out of our other studio, which we've now converted into 3 office spaces, which is a game changer for us. So even
Well,
though
it will be. They don't have any
true.
carpet or any furniture. Theoretically, they're game,
the
game changer
drywall, for
offices.
those of you that know construction processes, the drywall is up, textured, painted, and now we're at doors and trim. And so we're close. Actually, flooring. We're just about to put in a carpet.
And then we've converted another office space, our personal office space, into kind of a place where we can do film, and I'm really excited about it. And I spent all day yesterday filming for a new online course called Honorable Womanhood that I'm excited about, and that will be coming out in June. So yeah, we just have had a lot going on.
And it's the thing that's unique about this studio, which would be sort of fun to be in the studio talking about the studio, like on
Possibly
video.
next time.
Yeah, we'll see, because we haven't actually strategized that yet. Our podcast sort of is a fly by the seat of your pants type of podcast, wouldn't you say? Is that a good description for this?
I don't really like that phrase, but sure.
But that our new studio, which is in our office, we have one of the walls in the studio which is all windows. So it's a natural light studio, which I don't know that I've ever heard of, right? It was sort of our own invention, even though I'm sure it's not an invention. It's basically saying, okay, God invented light. Instead of trying to create light for a shot, what if we use natural light?
Yeah,
So
I really like it. It feels a lot more natural and relaxed and real life. So
Which is our
I'm
goal.
excited.
We
so
wanted to move-
possibly the next episode we can film one.
we've been wanting to move away from sort of that studio feel, which feels more impersonal, even though we're not wanting it to feel that way. It still just does, because you're manufacturing a scenario or a scene.
We have
And-
like a fake window behind you.
Yeah, and-
microphone on the table. So yeah, it's very nice, but it also doesn't feel as natural. So
But then
hopefully
now
this
moving
one-
to this is, I mean, it was beautiful. I'm really excited to see how it turns out. So just very excited about that. So we'll see. Maybe it's a future episode, like you said. So to pick up where we left off, we had talked about adoption, the impact of adoption on our lives. So if any of you want to listen to that previous episode, I think it was like episode 1238, and it would set the stage for this really nicely. But then I think we promised, and so we're trying to play out and fulfill that
I
promise.
remember we promised.
Okay, maybe we did.
We declared, we stated.
So we didn't promise. We just declared that we wanted to go through the stories of our adoptions. And so that's a unique adventure for us in and of itself. We have so many stories in our life. Our adoption stories they're personal, they're special, they're they're unique, and especially like the first two we want to cover because we have 4 adopted kids. We wanted to cover maybe the first 2 today. At least this is our plan. We'll see how well it works. First 2 today, and then maybe next week go through Reese and Lily's adoption, they're from Haiti. And those are very different adoptions. Like the first 2 were a pleasant experience. The Reese and Lily one was more of a battle, like to get them home. And okay, not just more of a battle, it was all out war.
Definitely a battle. And I would say even post-adoption has been a battle. But
it was a bit harder in all the logistical sides of that adoption. And
spiritually, there's just been a lot of warfare over those 2 coming into our home and things that we're still working through. But it's also been a beautiful process to see God.
Extraordinary.
And I always tell people, when you want to see the power of God, when you want to see miracles, we so often say, well, we don't really see miracles anymore today. Like people say that. Then stand for a vulnerable child, because that's when we really started to see incredible miracles. Not the only time, but I can definitely say in all of the adoptions, there were really clear miracles, really clear answers to prayer, really clear signs of God supernaturally working, because that is his heart, to set the solitary in families and to advocate for children that need a family. And so when we chose to say yes, as we shared in the last episode, when we chose to say yes, that's when we really started to see the power of prayer and the power of God work. And so, every single story has miracles in it.
They do.
And so we can start with Harper's. Hers is the first, and she's now 18. So it's crazy to think this was 18 years ago that this was all happening.
I still am struggling to accept that she's 18. I think when we went through COVID, our kids skipped 2 years or something in the mix. Don't you feel that? Like Harper should be 16.
Yeah.
She shouldn't be 18. Something's just off.
I think probably every parent thinks that, though, even if they didn't go through COVID. So it's just a thing.
So we probably are going to overlap a couple things from the last episode because I'm not sure how to get into a story without covering some of them. But our adoption season is going to awaken in and through our miscarriage. When we had a miscarriage in 2003, was it?
Hudson was 2, not quite 2.
He was born in 2004, so I'm off by
so you're off.
2006.
Somewhere in there.
Somewhere late fall 2006. We go walk through a miscarriage, which was an awakening for us to the value of the unseen, unknown lives, the lives that don't have a name yet, the lives that don't have a defined hair color, eye color, don't have a personality that we know. We can so easily discard and say that life doesn't matter. And I think God went on. He tutored us at a very deep level in the value of such a life, that to him, that life is precious. And that is going to then translate into our adoption experiences right there. That very idea.
Well, I think when we first embarked on the journey, it wasn't actually to adopt a child. It was more to stand for vulnerable children. Mainly because we had Hudson, and who's a biological child. He was not quite 2 at the time. And we didn't really we had perceived adoption as being extremely expensive. And it is. It's very expensive. All the fees you have to pay and the home study and everything. And we didn't feel like financially ready, really, to commit to something like that. So I think our idea was, and also we were busy, we were traveling, we were writing books, so the idea of just adopting felt a little overwhelming. Even though we wanted more kids, I think it was just, it wasn't something we really planned on doing.
I don't think
at least
I'd
right away.
Ever seriously thought about
I think it was always maybe in the back of our mind, that would be kind of neat to adopt someday. I know my parents had at one point wanted to adopt from China, never did, but had talked about it. So it kind of, it put the idea in our heart, but it wasn't really a forefront issue when we stepped into this. And we actually said, okay, well, we have a platform, we have books, we have people that listen to us when we speak. What can we do to stand for these 143 million vulnerable children around the world? It didn't feel like we could do that much, but okay, Lord, here's our platform. What can we do? And the first idea that came into our head was go to a local it was a Christian adoption agency. They had 2 orphanages overseas that they managed, and they also did work in adoption, but they also worked for just orphans and vulnerable
And it was
children.
China and Korea, or
Right.
those the two
And
nations?
they were advocates for these children. And so we thought, let's just go interview them. Let's find out, okay, what is the work you're doing with orphans and vulnerable children? Is there anything we can do to help what you're doing? So we walked into this adoption
Without
agency.
any intentionality, without any intention to adopt.
Yeah. That wasn't, in fact, I think, well, yeah, I remember very clearly on the way there, we were kind of bracing ourselves to say we are not going here to adopt a child. And you said, don't let them show you any pictures of any cute little kids.
Just wisdom there.
Yeah,
Wisdom.
because,
those cute kid pictures
And
are
he's like,
bound to change our minds.
yeah, you said like, if you see these adorable children, you're going to want to adopt all of them. We don't even have the money to do it for one, so we can't do this. And
Very practical. Very practical. It doesn't translate well
pretty much in
all these years
agreement.
later.
I don't think I was like, oh yes, we're going to adopt for sure. I think we were just like, no, it's not the right time or season for us. So we went in.
And I was a little, if I can remember, I was a little reticent to go to the adoption agency because I'm thinking, I've never been into a adoption agency before, so I'm not sure what they're going to do. If they have like a prepackaged way that they try and direct you towards, this type of adoption or this type of adoption.
Yeah, and I remember like you telling me, don't look at any pictures of any kid. Don't let them show you any pictures.
That's wise.
Because, the idea was like your heartstrings will get attached and then we'll feel like obligated to adopt a whole bunch of kids. And we don't even have the finances to commit to one adoption. So like, we better be careful about this.
Yeah. So, in hindsight, that doesn't translate very well, as far as my sensitivity and my compassion levels. But we were there because we were compassionate. We just had sort of ruled out the idea that we would ever adopt. And so, and even when we were sitting down, they didn't know how to address us because what do you mean you're not adopting, but you're still here? Yeah, we just want to do research. We're trying to.
We knew they had orphanages overseas. We knew they worked with vulnerable children. And we really just wanted to know, like, what do you do? Is there a way we can help? Is there a way we can be involved? And honestly, they had a pretty long waiting list for families who were ready to adopt the children that they worked with. So they weren't really in need of like, oh, we need you to adopt here. But they did mention the fact.
I need to add one thing in there, and that is that I had come to the place right before this moment that you're bringing up. I was itching to get out of there.
Sort of like, this probably wasn't the best.
This isn't a good fit.
Yeah.
This isn't what we should be doing.
There's not a whole lot we can do other than just sign up to adopt.
Because I think they said there was like a 120 person waiting list for a healthy child.
From China or Korea.
And it's
so
like,
we thought, well, that's not probably, and I do remember, I have to say, in backing up a little bit, when we realized the number was 143 million or more orphans and vulnerable children around the world. That number was so staggering, I think, to both of us that we thought, how can we possibly make a difference? This was just kind of a first practical step. But when you hear that, 120 on the waiting list, that's probably not the way we're going to make the biggest impact on this huge statistic of 143 million. But I do remember in a prayer time where we felt really clearly, Lord, what are we supposed to do to help 143 million? His answer to us was start with one. Yeah. And we didn't really know what that meant until the day we walked into this adoption agency. We did glean, though, from that kind of sense that God was giving us that he doesn't see a statistic or a big number. He sees each individual life, and each individual child is precious to him. And I think that's what he wanted us to encounter when we walked in there that day, because you had asked the question to the person we were meeting with, like, are there any other children besides the ones that, that have the 120 people ready to adopt them? And she said, well, we have waiting children. And that statement changed our life, that there were waiting children. So we started to ask, okay, what's a waiting child? Yeah. And she said, these are children who have some sort of medical issue or other reason
they could be older because
they might be older, or
they're not as desirable for whatever reason when you get to a certain age. Everyone wants an infant.
Yeah, and a lot of times parents are nervous to adopt like a child with some sort of medical problem because they don't know, will they be able to pay for the costs and what's involved in that and everything. So it's just sometimes easier to not sign up for that.
And you showed interest in that, and you sort of leaned in.
So, okay, what kind of medical conditions?
What kind of medical
Because she did say that the children on the waiting child list desperately needed families, and they had a very small window of time where their file could be made available. But if no one stepped up and said, I would love to adopt this child, I'm willing to, then they would just be probably
I
institutionalized
think
for the
that's what
rest
they
of their
said, which
life.
was like such a shocking word. They were stuck in an institution for the rest of their
Yeah,
life.
and it was just, it was a shocking reality
Yeah.
to think that because of a medical
Yeah.
issue, they would possibly never
They
have
don't
the
have the
love
same
of a family.
opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that really grabbed my heart, I know, and so I started asking more questions. What type of medical issues? And she said it could be anything, the whole gamut of, like a cleft palate all the way to like a very severe heart condition or something like that. And she said, for example, right now we have a baby girl who's, I think, 8 weeks old or something on our waiting child list who was born with deformities on her feet and without fingers except for thumbs. And we were really intrigued by that because we thought just because of that,
Yeah.
her whole life could be, without a
And
family.
her window of time.
Yeah, she only had a couple weeks left
Yeah.
or something like that. It was kind of like, wow, this child, for these issues that she has, these physical things, her whole life could be, very, very hard because she wasn't adopted in the window of time that she had. And so the lady could tell we were really kind of intrigued with this, like, wow, that's incredible to think about how much this child needs a family. And she said, well, I could show you her picture. I remember that moment. We're like, no, we already agreed. We're not looking at pictures.
Pre-decided, no see pictures.
And then she said, well, what if I just show you a picture of her hands? Then you'll get an idea what type of medical issue there is. And, you can just get an idea. And we thought, oh yeah, sure. Hands, that's fine.
That sounded completely harmless.
Yeah,
to look at a pair of
that's not going to
infant hands.
manipulate your heart.
Oh no.
Of course not. But then we see this picture.
It was like an 8x10.
It was
too.
a very big picture, and it was the most precious picture I've ever seen.
Still probably to this day.
Just the hands.
I
And
mean,
it was the picture was taken when she was 8 days old, I think, and they were just these little teeny mitts with these little teeny thumbs, and they were so beautiful. And we thought because of these precious, beautiful hands, she may never have a family.
Yeah.
And we just sat there in like stunned silence. We just couldn't even speak.
So I think to try and give the full picture here, because there's dynamic in between you and me at this point too, because something is happening inside of you and you see me sort of squirming, wanting to leave. And, it's like, I've seen enough. I want to get out. Now I know all of you are feeling like I'm heartless, but I wasn't heartless in this moment. I was actually concerned that I was going to cry. And I did not want to cry in this setting. This was not appropriate in my mind, right, at the time. As a guy that's, there's really hardly a situation other than a movie theater when I'm watching, a Hallmark.
Well, especially since we didn't intend to get emotionally
Yeah,
involved.
I mean, this is
when we walked
ridiculous.
in that
I
day.
just saw an 8x10 picture of some little infant hands. I should be totally fine. And so, but you're interpreting this as if I'm not engaged. I'm not interested. And you're seeing me sort of like rush us to be like, yeah, well, thank you so much for your help. And so we make it out to the car. And I think if I could, maybe you should speak for yourself, because I think you were a bit concerned about me.
Yeah, I was thinking, I really feel like God's doing something here. I feel my heart being stirred. I feel like, I remember hearing a little prior to this, Jackie Pullinger's message on standing for the poor. And she said, don't just assume if you hear about a need that somebody else is going to meet that need. Always ask God, am I the one that you've chosen to meet that need? And that stuck with me. And so here we were finding out about this child who only had a few weeks left on the availability list, who needed a family. And I thought, I don't want to have that attitude. Well, like someone else will meet the need, not to mention the fact that I was very stirred. We had never seen her face. We had never seen her picture, but there was something deeply stirring. Like this is something God's doing. And I was feeling like when God had said, start with one, when I saw those hands, this was the one we were supposed to start with. But then I remember thinking, I'm going to have to convince him because he's like not saying anything and everything. But then I remember I looked over and you had tears running down your face in the car. So God was obviously working in your heart too.
We couldn't even speak. I mean, I could not speak. I don't know if it was the whole trip home, but half the trip home. I don't remember, because sometimes you can, and this is a long time ago now, but I remember being so deeply moved, and it still touches me even to just ponder those hands and just how precious those have become in our life too, and how significant this is. But somewhere, I think along the journey back home, we did talk, I think, right?
Well, we started praying at first, and I think we prayed and really started speaking the words of Psalm 68, you are a father to the fatherless, you set the solitary in families. And that was the verse that kind of came to mind as we were praying, and we were speaking it in the car as we were driving. When we got home, I opened an email from a friend who had absolutely no idea.
Well, it's even more bizarre than that. Your computer, like we walk in from the garage, your computer is on the counter, face open and facing the door. Now it was like, on sleep mode, but it was like just sitting there, almost like it's waiting to say something.
So I opened the email, and it said, God, this friend had written us, and not knowing anything about this, and said, God put this verse on my heart to share with you. And it was the exact same verse. You are a father to the fatherless. You set the solitary in families.
Yeah.
So I think that was just extra confirmation.
Yeah.
Like, okay, God is doing something. This was a Friday afternoon. And I think we knew, even without seeing her picture or knowing anything else, we knew that this was supposed to be our child. This was the one that God had called us to start with as far as standing for vulnerable children. And I was like, you need to call this agency back and tell them. We had no idea how we were going to afford the adoption fees. It was even higher than what we thought it was going to be when she gave us numbers and stuff. And we couldn't get a hold of them on Friday because they had already closed by the time we got home and did all of this. And so all weekend long, I'm in agony, like, oh no, this is our child, but what if we don't get there in time? What if we don't call them in time and she goes to someone else? And even though she was on a waiting list needing a family, I still worried about that. But we called finally first thing Monday morning and said, we don't really know how we're going to pay the fees, but we know this is supposed to be our child.
And because of the nature of the situation, to move it forward because of the waiting situation, they gave us, 2 weeks? And we had to have half of the money paid to begin, I don't know if it was to begin the adoption.
I think to begin the process, there were a lot of fees that were due up front. And
it was a very large amount of money.
Home study cost a couple $1,000s, and it just added up, all the different things you paid for.
Half of it was like $15,500 and something, right? I think.
But this is where I would say this is where the miracles of God started to be seen. We were also in a season where we were learning about wrestling prayer. So we were praying for this adoption for hours at a time, praying over the financial need that we had. And we really didn't tell anybody. We told my parents, and it was special for them because they had always wanted to adopt a child, especially from like China or Korea. And so they were really excited about it, but they just quietly mentioned it to a few of their friends, and they really didn't go on a big fundraising campaign. They just mentioned it, and people started to send in checks and said, this is to support your adoption. And it was really incredible because without really asking for money, the day we needed to go in and pay those fees up front, those upfront fees, we had gotten basically all but like $30 of what was needed. And that was incredible because that was a very short period of time, and we weren't aggressively asking for money. And then a girl was over at our house babysitting Hudson when we were about to go in to pay these fees. And she's now our sister-in-law, which is crazy to think about. But she said, I was getting ready to pay her for babysitting him. And I don't remember if it was when we left or when we got home, but it was going to be $30.
Yeah.
And she said, don't pay me, just put that towards your adoption fund. So the day we needed it, all the way to the last dollar we had. And that was the first big miracle that we saw.
It was an extraordinary miracle. I think for us, that was such a heavenly statement of how much God cares about this, because we didn't go around and ask anyone. We just had a need. And God, if you're moving us forward, you see this need. And if you really do, if you're really the father of the fatherless, and this is your burden, it's almost like show us how this works.
The second big miracle that we saw in the process was this timing, because I remember saying, I want to pray that this is the fastest adoption this agency has ever done. And you were kind of hesitant about that at first. You're like, well,
there was reasons for that. We had 2 book deadlines. And
I was like, how can you be so heartless? Book deadlines or a child that we're supposed to bring into our family? Like, which is more important?
Well, I'm just thinking, let's just pray that it's a normal speed.
And I'm like, no, we're praying that this is the fastest that they've ever done. And I convinced you to pray that way too.
I did. I agreed. So even though I look bad in this story, because I don't want to look at pictures at an adoption agency and I want it to be a normal length adoption, it was something that I agreed with. It's like, okay. Yeah,
so we started to pray really intensely about that, purposely about that. And we were pretty fast at getting all the paperwork in, and we had to fill out all sorts of things, but we're writers, so we
Yeah.
could do that pretty fast. So that was part of what helped speed it along. But there were a lot of things that could have taken a really long time. Like this one form we had to get filled out was some sort of background check or something like that. And it was like a 8 to 10 week delay to get all of that processed. And I told the agency, like, well, we don't want to wait 8 to 10 weeks for one piece of paperwork. Is there anything we can do to speed up that process? And she said, well, you could drive to Denver and go give your file to them in person and see if they'll expedite it. But I've never heard of them doing that. And we're like, okay, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to just in faith, we're going to go down there, hand them the file. And this was an interesting story because I was not feeling very good by the time we got down there. I had printed out this letter all about, this child that needed a home and she needed to get home as soon as possible. And I had her picture, which she was adorable as a baby. So I was like, well, she's adorable now too, but she's 18. But like as a baby, she was like a heart melting baby, And so I had her picture there and I had the letter written and the whole thing ready. And I envisioned sitting down with some sympathetic person behind a desk and like pleading our case. And they were like, oh, I'd love to expedite this for you. But we get down there and there's this huge long line of like 20 or 30 people, and you don't sit across the desk from someone. You have to go up to like this partition, this glassed off partition with like
window.
plexiglass and a little hole and a button you push to talk to the person. And it was very impersonal.
Yeah.
And the person sitting behind the thing was very grumpy and just wanting to get the people through
It was
the line.
the worst possible
So
setup.
I'm like, this is going to be a wasted trip. But we kept praying the whole time we were in line. And so I got up there. I think it was me that was very passionate
No, you
about.
were mom on the mission.
So I'm
There's
like,
no doubt about it.
oh, could you please help us with this baby? Look at how cute and her story and da-da-da. And the person behind the thing was just like, no, we don't do that. But then right at that moment, this other lady walked into this little cubicle that the first lady was in and needed to get something. And she heard me talking.
I think she was digging through a file cabinet.
And she turned around. She's like, tell me about your situation. And I gave her, well, look at the baby and the letter and the story. And I gave her the whole thing. And that was definitely a God moment because this woman was like 8 months pregnant. And I think she had the
And she
maternal.
also happened to be in charge of the whole office.
Yeah. And that worked out really well because I'm like talking about this baby in need and she's pregnant and she's like, soon to be mother. So she was like, oh, I want to do whatever I can to help you. So she picked up a phone and made a phone call and said, you'll have these papers back in a week. And that was just an incredible miracle because that never happens in situations like this.
The whole process of that adoption felt like it had a supernatural gloss.
Definitely everything about it. And I remember them calling us a few weeks later and saying, are you ready for this news? Your child is ready to come home from Korea. And this is the fastest adoption this agency has ever done.
And they'd been in business for what, 20 years or something like that?
And so our exact prayer was answered for that. And then we saw miracles in just getting her home in the first place because she was only 6 months old. She had always been with this one foster mom. It was a really good situation, actually. She hadn't been in an orphanage. She had one-on-one care from a really wonderful Christian lady, but that's all she knew. And so in one day, some stranger's going to come and just take her away, whisk her out of the country, take her away from the lady she'd always been with. And for a 6-month-old baby, that's pretty traumatic. And also, she was the type of baby who was very needy and attached and, didn't do well with strangers and stuff. And so we actually sent my mom and my mom's good friend over to Korea to pick up Harper and bring her home because we weren't really keen about traveling across the world with our 2-year-old, but we didn't want to leave him either and go overseas and come back with a sibling. We thought that would be a little jarring to him. So she wanted to go and we thought, okay, we'll make a way for her to go pick her up. That way she's still with family and we can, come to the airport and meet her there. And so that was the plan. But then the people that were kind of in charge of the adoption on the Korea side said, this baby is not going to do well. She has stranger anxiety because the foster mom couldn't even give her to anyone else without her having a complete meltdown. And so they just weren't sure how she was going to do on the plane with my mom, who she'd never seen before. And they wanted to give her medication and sedate her just to get her on the plane. So I started to pray, not only for the trip across the ocean, but also that she would know us when she saw us. And a couple really amazing things happened. One was on the trip. My mom and my mom's friend were flying with this hysterical baby who would not stop crying. And this is like a however many
It's a
hours,
long,
17
long
hours
trip.
or something like that. And she thought, we are going to drive everyone on this plane totally crazy. No one can sleep, And Harper had a very intense cry, when she was
Oh, yeah.
hysterical. It was like hysterical, meltdown. And this Korean woman came up to my mom and my mom's friend and could not speak English. She just motioned, give me the baby. Yeah, I'll take her. I'll take care of her. And my mom at that point was just like, I don't know who you are, lady, but you can have her. Like, just take her. And the woman was perfect
Yeah.
because she was Korean. She was able to
You know,
speak
make the same sounds.
all the
different
clicking
sounds.
noises that they
Yeah.
make to the babies, and she could speak to her in the same language she was used to and knew how to hold her the way that they hold them over there, and just totally calmed her down and basically took care of her the whole flight
Yeah.
and brought her back to my mom at the end, and through an interpreter said, I'm a Christian and God told me to take care of this baby. And that was just an incredible answer to prayer. And then when she came to the airport with my mom and we came to the airport to meet her, the concern was that, she wouldn't, and the social worker even told us, she's not going to bond with you. She's going to be afraid of you. She's going to have all this stranger anxiety. Don't take it personally. But we prayed that she would know immediately that she was coming home. This is her family. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't cry at all. She just came to us and she was like melted into us and just was like, I'm home.
Yeah.
And the social worker came to our house the next day to check up on this child who had been flagged as a problem, like extreme stranger anxiety, all these problems.
May need
like,
drugs. Yeah.
May need, intervention. Like, I don't know how this is going to go, like bonding issues and stuff. And the social worker's like, I have no idea why they flagged her file. Like, this baby knows who her parents are. And so one answered prayer after the next. It was amazing. And so
was.
now here we are 18 years later.
Such a precious story. That is, there's so many dynamics and details to that are just so amazing. Such a gift to us as parents too, as just a hallmarker of God's involvement. God saying, you stand up for these kids, I stand up for you. And that's just really precious to remember. So here's what I'm thinking, Les. So that we don't rob from Kip's story, why don't we'll either combine it with Reese and Lily's next week or give it a week all its own, because they're very special stories to us. And I think to take our time and not feel rushed in them.
Well, Kip's story is when Kip came into our home, we also had a biological child right after he came home. So we could talk a little bit about our season where we had 4 children under the age of 5 and 2 babies at once and 2 toddlers at once. And that would be a fun little
And
addition.
we're starting Ellerslie at the same time.
Yeah,
How about that?
that would be a fun addition to Kip's story, because
It is a
that
part
was
of
that
Kip's
season.
story. Yeah.
Yep.
That's great. Well, thanks for talking about Harper. That was very special. Now I need to, go over and give her a big hug and kiss, because that's pretty special memories.